Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Pinkin.com Norwich City podcast. It's over. The Premier League dream never really turned out to be a dream. It was more of a nightmare, but it's over for Norwich City, and we're intent to try and look forward as much as we can. We're just going to have a quick section at the start of the pod this week to sort of wrap things off for the season, but then we're mainly going to turn our attentions to the future because I think we've all had enough of wallowing in this negativity for the last few weeks, haven't we? I'm Dave Freezer, joined by Connor Southwell and Paddy Davitt. You can also hear us on Future Radio 107.8 FM. Chaps, how are we doing? What did you make of the Man City game, Pat? If I come to you first, I mean, Kevin De Bruyne, what a player!
Yeah, he's a special talent. I felt sorry for Marco Steepman. If you immediately you say Kevin De Bruyne, I think Marco Steepman because he completely bamboozled him with his dancing feet. But then the finish was, I mean, Tim Krul, as good as he's been, got nowhere near either of them strikes, and that is world class. You know, that term gets bandied about far too easily in a footballing context, but that man is genuine world class. He's not alone in that Man City team or squad. So and obviously the manager himself / coach, world class. So not unexpected. I was asked that. What did I think the score? I actually said that they'd leak 5 before kickoff, funnily enough. But
at least 5 or exactly?
I said 5. Yeah, I said they get beat by 5. Yeah, but that's not really pushing myself too much on the punditry slates because it was always probably going to be. And of course, then when having already gone into the game with lads unavailable through injury and suspension, and then you've got 2 keepers on the bench, and you can only name 8 of your 9 allotted. I mean, as Daniel said, you know, there's no way in those terms they were going to be competitive, which I thought was a little bit harsh because in terms of the game itself. Of course, it was what you expected. Norwich more or less having to camp in front of Tim Krul and fill holes and desperate defending at times. But in the main, I thought they acquitted themselves reasonably well. But ultimately, not for just that game, but the whole season, they haven't had enough quality and they've been outclassed too often. And that was probably quite a fitting way to bow out because that's kind of how most of that season panned out. They just simply wasn't good enough.
The 5th one, the second De Bruyne goal, was I just had the best view in the house of it. I was right behind it. The second he struck it, you knew it was hitting that far post and going in, and he made awesome contact with it. But it just looked so easy for him as well, just almost like a lazy swipe at the ball, and it absolutely flew past Krul. And you see it in the replay, Krul sort of throwing his hand up like, "Oh, come on, this isn't fair. What am I supposed to do against that?" But it was always a bit of a hiding to nothing situation for Norwich, wasn't it? But Connor, once again, a little reminder just before we say goodbye to it of VAR. The decision was correct, wasn't it? But Norwich were back on the halfway line. They were pretty much ready to kick off again by the time it was chalked off.
Yeah, first and foremost, I'll say it's working at home. Literally, as you press record there, someone started hoovering in my house. So apologies if you pick that up. I think it should be okay. But yeah, it's I won't be sad to see the back of it. I'll be completely honest. It's more the people using it that I have an issue with, I think, rather than the technology itself, as has been proved this season. Yeah, it was probably a little bit of a harsh decision in the sense, yeah, it was the right decision, but equally, I think Steepman probably gets fouled before he plays the pass, and he doesn't really consider those things. But yeah, ultimately, it was the right decision, and that was what he was brought in to do. Obviously, you hope next season with a year's sort of experience that those decisions will get quicker. Yeah, I think it'll be nice, and we sort of got a glimpse of it in the FA Cup tie at Preston, actually, that when it's not there, football seems a bit more wholesome and a bit more natural, I guess, and it's nice to sort of a team to score a goal and to have that natural outpouring of emotion from supporters when they're in the grounds, as opposed to sort of everyone standing around sort of waiting for a screen to verify the decision. It sort of dilutes it a little bit, and perhaps it isn't as raw and it isn't the football that we like. But it will be nice to have a season where the goals are going to be goals if they're given, and it will be a brief look to the linesman as was, and that'll be it. So I'm looking forward to it, actually, and that is, I think, probably one of the perks of the Championship. There are many of them. It's a crazy league, but yeah, no VAR is going to be lovely. I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah, I think it wouldn't be the Premier League if Norwich didn't say goodbye with a VAR decision. So, and it was quite a good goal from Hernandez as well, who I thought was very lively generally on Sunday, and has probably been one of the few shining lights to come out of Norwich City's performances post lockdown. So disappointing in the sense that I felt they kind of deserved the goal for their performance, but probably not too surprising given their luck and given their history of VAR this season.
Yeah, I think he just took the shot that little bit earlier than Ederson expected, didn't he? And then caught him out at his near post. He connected with it quite sweetly, but he got past Kyle Walker so easily. Like, I asked Daniel about O'Neill a couple of weeks ago. I think it might have been before the Watford game, and he said that sometimes even O'Neill doesn't know what he's going to do when he's running with the ball, does he? And that's partly the problem with him. But that was a shame for him. I spoke to him after the game as well. Again, in this awkward situation of being, I could see him, but I was, 50 foot away from him, maybe 100 foot away from him, and we're speaking on the phone because I'm not allowed into the red zone, and they're not easy interviews. But we actually got interrupted by Kevin De Bruyne at one point as well, who I think O'Neill might know from. He had a little spell at Wolfsburg, didn't he? Because he knew Tim closer before he came to Norwich. I think that may have coincided with De Bruyne at Wolfsburg as well. But anyway, if anyone's going to interrupt your interview, then Kevin De Bruyne is not a bad one. But you could tell how disappointed he was with that. And although it's difficult to say after losing 5-0, they were disappointed because, of course, after that Hernandez chance, Pad, we've got to talk about Teemu Pukki's lack of confidence again, haven't we? Because he definitely should have been equalising, or at least making a better fist of it than he did.
Yeah, I mean, no, not for one moment did I think he would score, and that's complete contrast to if he'd have gone through and he was facing, I'll say no disrespect, but it is disrespect. I don't know, Rotherham's keeper, Wigan's keeper, whatever, last season, that would have been in the back of the net. And in fact, I'd say Wigan. I mean, I remember when Norwich took 5,000, didn't he score? Very similar, ran through and slotted, very composed finish. And that is the byproduct of a man who, I mean, I've said my views. I fear it might be his better days are behind him. But even if that isn't the case, what it is, and Daniel alluded to it, just a player who's played so much football in a relatively short period of his career for club and country. He's been so important, couldn't really give him a breather, and looks like it's caught up with him. And he's coming up against obviously Premier League level defenders and defending, and since the foot injury at Leicester, December, pale imitation of what we know, and throwing it forward, that's the thing now. And obviously wrapped around that game was all the speculation beforehand about Turkey and Besiktas and exploratory talks with his representative. But Daniel, very, very clear. He feels he's the man who can fire Norwich back to where they want to go, and that's the Premier League. So as far as Daniel Farke's concerned, he expects Teemu Pukki to be here next season. If that is the case, so they somehow in this relatively short pre-season need to find the Teemu Pukki of the Championship vintage, because that chance really summed up his last probably 9 months, really, that when he's in those positions, albeit in smaller quantities than the Championship, inevitably, but when he's in them, you don't really have any confidence, and he doesn't look like he's a man who's got any confidence. And and you could see his reaction straight away. He knew, massive chance. And in the context of playing Man City, you have to take that because you're not going to get too many more.
Yeah, I mean, I've interviewed Teemu quite a lot in the last couple of years, and in a variety of different locations. Germany, the James Paget Hospital in Galston, in a toy room, while a little... he may not have been sick, but he may have been visiting somebody. But a kid was like playing around while me and Chris Gorham were interviewing Pukki in some Scandinavian lodge at a hotel in South Norfolk. So I've sort of interviewed him a fair few times, and he's such a down-to-earth character, such a nice bloke. And last season, that came across as being ice cool, didn't it? And it fed into this narrative of him being a clinical finisher. But now that the confidence has gone and he's on this horrible streak, that's 21 games he finished the season without a goal in open play. Okay, there were 2 penalties, but no goals from open play since that Leicester game. That character then almost looks timid, doesn't it? So And kind of that would have been an equaliser. O'Neill would have been putting them in front. Then De Bruyne decides to score his absolute wonder goal just before half time. They were in this game. They could have caused some kind of an upset. So, and Josh Martin, what about that chance at the end as well?
Yeah, they had chances, and as I said in my previous answer, I think they were probably unlucky to come out of that game without a goal, to be honest. And I think Pad was spot on in terms of their approach. I didn't feel like there was much more that could have been done in terms of the way they approached the game. Ultimately, it boils down to quality. Manchester City have loads. Norwich City don't have enough at this level, and I think that's probably an area that they're going to look to address in terms of depth and having a bit more strength in depth in their squad. And I think it's something that's necessary. When we all saw the bench on Sunday, and it was 6 academy graduates on the bench, 10 in the squad in total, and that probably sort of sums up where they are at the moment in terms of their squad and in terms of their direction. So it does need the injection of something, but yeah, with the chances they had, you would hope, regardless of whether it's Manchester City or whether it's Rotherham, as Paddy said, that they would be able to score with the chances they created. And it's probably an element of confidence and how much that has oozed away. And we can talk about how sort of free-flowing and attacking they were in the early phases of the season. That Chelsea game stands out to me as being one where they just looked like they were going to score every time that they went forward. Okay, they also looked like they were going to concede every time they were defending, but that was a bit more in line with what they were like in the Championship, and that sort of faded away, I think, really since probably Timu's injury, and there is so much responsibility on his shoulders, and there is so much pressure that's put onto him to produce the goals for Norwich City, and I think it's just probably all taking its toll on him a little bit. And I kind of wonder whether the Euros being sort of pushed back a year has almost made him take his foot off the pedal a little bit, because it was something he was aiming to get to. It was Finland's first. He wanted to fire them into that, and maybe his foot has been taken off because now he knows that carrot isn't there for him to perform, and whether that's consciously or subconsciously, I don't know. But yeah, it's clear that he isn't the same player that he was last season, and I'm the same really. When he went through, I never really had confidence that he was going to score. It kind of looked like he was sort of doubting himself, I guess, as to where he was going to put the ball, and in the end he puts it straight at Ederson. And it's almost one of those situations where a striker out of form has too much time to think about it. It's one of those, isn't it? And Paddy referenced the Wigan goal. I'd referenced the Millwall one. It was very similar to that, where he peeled off the defender, went through and took the goal with such confidence last season, and it looks a shadow of that player, and you just hope that he can find it, and he needs something to hit his knee and go in or something, because then I think that's when we'll see whether this is just a lack of confidence rather, or whether it is a regression and it is something that is a bit more long term and a bit more terminal. And let's hope that it is just confidence, because clearly Norwich City are going to need him to reproduce, if not the same amount of goals, then certainly a better sort of number of goals in the Championship next season. I think the thing is about selling Teemu Pukki is that's a striker who scored 29 goals in the Championship, and they're not going to find another one of those with their price and their financial muscle. So to me, they have to do all they can to keep him, but they also have to hope that he can produce what he has, and the best days aren't behind him. And I think there's probably going to be some inward looking of himself to make sure that's not the case. But Norwich, it's Man City probably could have got more. I think I'd add that, but Norwich City were definitely unlucky to come away, I think, with nil. They deserved a goal, and they certainly had the chances to do that. And once again, it boils down to, as so much of this season does, quality, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Zimmerman turned that De Bruyne cross onto the post, didn't he? Which, surprise, surprise, was a brilliant cross. But yeah, Championship defences are going to be scared of Pukki next season. So he, at his age, I know he's not ancient. He's 30, isn't he? I don't think he's turned 31 yet. They're probably not going to get the sort of bids which are going to really tempt them into selling him, as opposed to keeping hold of him and seeing whether he can rediscover his magic in the Championship. Because you mentioned Millwall, but the home game, the one that won it, the 4-3, he knew very little about it. He was just in the right place at the right time, wasn't he? Just hung his leg out and got a bit of luck and was the hero. But that's going to be really interesting.
That's the life of striker, though, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But that's the life of striker. Sometimes you don't have to think of it, and the ball hits you and goes in, and you feel like you've got all the luck and you feel like the best striker in the world. And other times you try almost too hard and you have chances that you just can't score. It's an interesting thing being a striker, because you're judged purely on goals, aren't you? It doesn't matter how good you are in terms of your overall play. If you score goals, then you're a hero. So it's difficult for him at the moment, and all strikers go through it. And I think for him, it's just a case of coming out the other side with the same self-belief and the same confidence in his ability that he had in the Championship. And if he retains that, and Norwich City retain their style and have a squad that can create chances for him, then you would back him, hopefully on form and on evidence in previous seasons, to continue scoring. But if he can't get a goal quickly in the Championship and he can't break his ducks, then it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, to see him produce the same level of output that we saw in the Championship, I think. So it's an important sort of opening 10 games for Norwich generally, but also for Teemu Pukki, I'd say.
Yeah, I just read into the Daniel Farke comments afterwards. I don't think he'd have committed quite that much if he didn't think there was a good chance of Teemu still being here next season. Right, let's wrap off this horrendous season, as it's turned out to be, unfortunately. Lowest ever points total for a Norwich City team in the top flight. They set a Premier League record of only 7 away goals. We can just go through a load of these facts and figures, but let's try and at least have a little bit of fun. To start with, player of the season voting, I think, would either of you sort of quibble with the top 3 that the fans voted? Krul first, Cantwell second, Tetty third. I mean, I think Byram or Hanley probably would have been, if they'd have been able to continue playing as they were, would have been in contention for third for me.
Yeah, I mean, Krul stand out, and beyond that, much of a muchness, really. Yeah, I mean, team finishing that far adrift, you're not going to have too many standouts, are you? And so is it all. I mean, the ship 70 plus, and you keep
75 in the end, wasn't it?
You keep as your best player. So yeah. I mean, the only one who got anywhere near a consistent benchmark that would have been acceptable in the Premier League for me, Tim Krul.
Yeah. Okay. And best match, I think we can pretty much agree on that one, can't we? Man City at home, a special day. I mean, Connor, that was your first game with us, wasn't it? First time you were in the press box alongside me and Pad after getting your role with the EDP and even using Pinken, and you picked a decent one.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad first game. I think it was Burnley away the week after, so that was back down to earth with a bump, I think, for everyone. But yeah, I don't think there's really any competition this season, is there? Maybe if I was to throw one, then Spurs in the Cup is probably a second. But beyond that, I think I'm probably struggling to think of another one that sort of was on the same level as certainly Man City, but of those two generally.
That's a good shout, but it was a special day, and it will live a long time, certainly with me, and I'm sure everyone listening as well. Right, here's a bigger one to get your teeth into. Then, worst match. There are quite a few contenders here. I'm a bit torn, but I'm going to go for Southampton at home, the first game after the restart, just because the second half was such a surrender and was so damaging to what then followed. Their survival hopes basically were killed with the way they performed. It was only 1-0 at half time, I think, if I'm remembering that rightly. It might have even been 0-0. Let me just double check that. But that as a performance was just so flat. And we'd gone into that. There were 6 points adrift. Everyone was talking about how important the home games were. They've got the home games up first. Oh, it was 0-0 at half time, sorry. Ings scored 4 minutes after half time. So that second half just killed everything, didn't it? And ever since, it's been miserable. Pad, worst of the season for you?
Yeah, that's a good shout, Southampton. But I'm going to go Brighton away, start of November. That was pretty dispiriting for us, because we got absolutely deluged walking from the station. It was only about 3-minute walk, but we were absolutely drowned as rats. And then that set the tone, because they got beat 2-0, but it was the manner of it. They were not at the races, and Brighton could have won far more comfortably that day. I think Tete had to go in at centre-back, or had to go started centre-back, I can't think off the top of my head, or ended up switching to centre-back. But either way, Connolly and Maupay were just too hot for them. And in the sense that you looked at Brighton and you thought, well, these are the sort of teams where Norwich, if they're going to do anything this season, need to probably get a result. And even a draw wouldn't have been a bad result. But they were so far short of what was required. And then you probably began to feel that this isn't going to go how we hoped it would. And then the following week, actually, they had Watford at home. That was the Buendia giving it to Gerard Deulofeu within about 3 minutes. Lost that game 2-0. So I think those two together, in the space of about 6 days in November, probably just underlined that Norwich weren't going to have enough about them to make it a fair fight. So, I found those two pretty dispiriting. But I wouldn't disagree, to be fair with you, DF. Southampton was a pretty big moment. But Brighton away, still drying out.
Yeah, and Connor will remember that I got into an argument with a steward after the game who interrupted my video verdict, which nearly...
It's probably a good job we're not going back there next season. I'm not sure you'd be let in,
I don't like that place. Ever since the 5-0 under Alex Neil, when Russell Martin came out and gave that sort of almost tearful, passionate speech straight out of the dressing room, still adrenaline pumping because he was so embarrassed and angry about it. That was a grim day, I can assure you. But as I say, plenty of contenders. Connor, which takes worst match for you?
Yeah, I think Southampton for me. Although, memories of that Brighton game is quite something. I don't think those trousers that I wore that day are dry now, let alone. And that's however many months afterwards. It was that bad. Although Norwich did hit the bar that day, which is probably closer than they've got in some away games this season. So that's probably why Southampton pips it to me, I think.
So Steedman hit the bar?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, it was a curling effort, I think, from memory. Fairly early on as well, I think.
I think it was nil-nil.
A false sense of hope. But yeah, that Southampton one for me, so much hope and expectation that it could be different. Talk of the sort of 9-game playoff, and yeah, it all fell sort of flat on its face, and that sort of set the tone for the restart, didn't it? It kind of felt like after that and the Everton game that the players had almost accepted their fate to some extent, and that for me is it. I think because of how much excitement there was from everyone, and football was meant to lift everyone's mood, wasn't it? And it was its return, and it was going to be different, and it turned out actually to be a lot worse than what we had before. And also I'd just chuck in, because of the fact there's no supporters there as well. I think the experience generally behind closed doors isn't particularly great. So yeah, Southampton for me, but yeah, honourable mentions for Brighton and Watford, and also probably the Burnley game that we had fairly recently at Carrow Road as well. I think they're the ones I'd chuck in.
I am sick of behind closed doors football, but obviously we have a far more serious situation, and we have to be dictated by the national health needs rather than football. That's what's far more important. But let's hope we can get back to normal life at some point next season, because that's not even looking certain yet, is it? I know that they're talking about potential for some fans being back in grounds early stages of the season, but getting back to proper normality still feels a way off. Right, best moment and worst moment. Let's leave the final whistle against Man City aside, because I think that's kind of obvious, isn't it? That roar was special. But I'll throw in a little bit of a left field one, which was Adam Eder scoring almost straight away at Preston in the FA Cup. Sent through by Stevenman, wasn't he? Tucked it away. Lovely goal. And partly because there was no VAR, so we were like, oh, it's definitely a goal. The referee's blown his whistle. we're cracking on. But just, none of us were really expecting him to start that game, and then within minutes he'd scored. So that was a quite exciting moment, which of course got even better when he completed his hat-trick. Pad, best moment?
Yeah, well, if we're going to ring fence Man City and come up with an alternative, I'm actually going to go before a ball was kicked this season, which was Anfield, about 5 minutes to kick off. You'll Never Walk Alone ringing round, which might seem like a Liverpool-centred view, but just the fact that Norwich were in that environment. It was the first game since they'd won the European Cup, Norwich's first game back in the Premier League. To take Connor's point, packed house at Anfield, bloody lovely splashes of yellow to the left of where we sat, red all the way around the ground, just phenomenal experience. And this was what everything they did in the intervening 9-10 months was leading up to, was this moment that both sets of players emerge into this cauldron. Global television audience. Let's not forget the very first game of the Premier League season, Friday night. Monster global audience. Tens and tens and tens, probably even hundreds of millions watching that game. And for Norwich, little old Norwich, to be part of that was quite special. And just that anthem ringing around, that was hairs on the back of the neck. And sadly, it went south pretty rapidly. And by half time, they were well out of the game. But yeah, that was the moment really when you thought, well, yeah, whether you're a fan, whether you're a player, head coach, whether it's just in the media, and you're going to some of these more modest outposts in the Championship on a Tuesday night, miles away from Norwich and Norfolk, that's what it's all about, is to try and be part of this circus. And sadly, fleeting on this occasion. But if I'm not looking beyond Man City, I would go Anfield just before kickoff, I think.
Yeah, that was epic. It was the first time I've been to Anfield as well, so that the experience of that noise was pretty special. Connor, what about you?
I'm going to give a mention to Everton away, which was obviously the only away win this season in the league. That was decent. Dennis Srbeny scored as well, which was probably a little bit of a surprise for everyone, although he's done very, very well in the Bundesliga. But I think if we're not saying Manchester City, then for me it has to be that Tottenham FA Cup. So I think from memory, that's, unless I'm missing anything, that's the first penalty shootout I've seen live as well. And it was just with the 9,000 Norwich fans in what is such a wonderful stadium. The occasion of it was excellent, and for me that's kind of where the FA Cup went, because that quarter final didn't feel like an FA Cup quarter final at Carrow Road, and it's almost it wasn't. It was a shell of what it would have been if all the Norwich fans and Manchester United fans would have been in the stadium. For me that Spurs game was a very special night, and that roar when Tim Krul saved that final penalty from that away end was excellent, and also the sea of the players running over to it and sharing the moment with those supporters was very good as well. And the game as well, I thought generally was pretty good in terms of Norwich's perspective, and scoring the equaliser. It was probably the only time they've come from behind this season. They didn't win the game outright, but at least to walk away through to the next round, that was very good. And again, to do it in that stadium was in front of 9,000 Norwich fans was really special. So that's the one I think that I'll take away from this season. But that day at Goodison Park wasn't too bad either. To talk about the blue side of Merseyside for a second, purely because Norwich won. But I think at the time it also kind of felt like they found their way again. I remember Kenny McLean was playing as a number 10, and they used him slightly differently and got a lot of joy. Yeah, exactly. And I think the reality of it probably was that Everton were very poor. And I remember that. I don't know if either of you were in the press box after. It might have been long after you. I think Pad had gone to Daniel Farke's press conference and you'd gone to the mix zone. But there was a Scouse lad shouting at Bill Kenwright about Marco Silva at the time, which was quite amusing. I think it was the worst manager we've ever had. He's got to sack him or something along those lines. But it was quite amusing anyway. I'd give an honourable mention to Everton, but that Tottenham game for me, if we're not allowed Manchester City, I think probably is my highlight. Yeah,
the mix zone after that game was buzzing. Byram had played at left back because Lewis was injured, hadn't he? I remember Stuart Webber coming through carrying some of the stuff with the kitmen and stuff, because he was so buzzing about the day that he decided to get stuck in and help load up the coach. I think we spoke to 2 or 3 players after it. You know, they thought that they were really onto it, and I think we said in last week's pod after the Burnley game that December was where they should have been, making this a very different season, shouldn't they? But let's not go back over that. You mentioned Dennis Srbeny, scored as many top-flight goals this season as Todd Cantwell, who's of course now being linked with lots of big-name clubs. And I just pulled up the other players that he scored as many top-flight goals as this season. David Silva, James Maddison, Lys Mousset, Ollie McBurney. He scored more than Ismail Assar, who was worth 30 million, or Watford paid 30 million for him. So who knows? Maybe in a parallel universe, things could and should have worked out differently for Dennis. Right, worst moment then for me. The standout moment was the Watford game. First 2 minutes, Godfrey charges out of position. Buendia stupidly loses possession. They concede an early goal. Absolutely kills the Carrow Road atmosphere. That was a massive, massive game. At that time, when they were just sort of showing a bit of life, if they'd have won that game, you know, that things could have looked very different. But I think that a lot of Norwich fans I've heard go back to that night and sort of cite that as that was the night that they thought, we're in trouble here. This could well be a relegation season. So that silly Buendia flick is one that stands out in my mind as the worst. Connor, I'll come to you on this one.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be inclined to agree. The only thing I would throw in is the series of away games after Burnley. So I'm probably picking a few moments here in terms of just those 2-0 defeats where they didn't really offer too much. Yeah, but I think that Buendia flick, it probably stands out in my mind. Also, the first 10 minutes against Sheffield United in December when Sheffield United basically just upped their levels and scored 2 goals. But that Buendia flick, yeah, that stands out to me as probably the moment that, certainly in my mind at least, that the season turned a little bit from positivity, I think, to perhaps a bit of negativity. And it almost woke people up, I think, to the scale of the task. And yeah, it never really recovered from there, I don't think, in terms of momentum and confidence and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd probably be inclined to agree with you there.
Pad?
Yeah, well, I mean, on that theme, I mean, you've sort of said Watford, that was early November. My mind went to probably bookending that definitive spell, which was Palace, New Year's Day, Carrow Road, 84 minutes on the clock, Norwich are 1-0 up. Connor Wickham, he formerly of the parish across the border, scrambles in. I think it had to be VAR checked, but it was. I think Zimmerman had just played him onside, hadn't he? And you just think, given the chances they'd spurned in the intervening months, if they'd have got the win there, turning for home then 2020, you bounce into it, and who knows then, as it was, I think they only won another 2 league games. So, yeah, I think any period from Watford to Palace, I think you could look at that, and there was so many moments that could have been different if they'd somehow or other just managed to get their noses over the line in a lot of games where they were leading, and that, for me, was the one, I think, because Palace then might have got sucked back down into it, and Norwich would have had another 2 points on the board. And it's just a feel good. It's not so much one particular game or one result, but the feeling that around the place, and that just might have given everybody a boost, bit of extra belief. Of course, I think the following week they go to Preston, they do what they do there, and then you're bouncing into January rather than fearing that you're already too far adrift. So, yeah, because they got so close that night, I think, as I say, 6 minutes from time, what a win would have done from, we'll never know. But yeah, that would be one of my most heart-rendering moments of the season, I think.
Yeah, when in real time, we all thought Wickham was offside, didn't we? And then as soon as we saw that first VAR replay, everyone was like, oh no, here we go. Because, of course, the game before that was the Pukki VAR decision, wasn't it? That it would have been 2-0 up against Spurs. They were playing well, and that wonderful pass from Mario Vrancic gets overruled by the most marginal. You look at, Onel Hernandez, in traditional terms, pre-VAR, that Onel Hernandez decision on Sunday is kind of a marginal offside, but it is correct. But Pukki's is far, far more marginal than that was. I mean, to the point where there was actually even debate as to whether it had been 100% proved by the technology as to whether it was offside, hadn't it? So that could probably be one of the contenders there. Right, let's just finish on 2 positives. We'll quickly go through these. Best goal and best save. Best save for me is, I've already put that out there because I did a story. I went for the Harry Maguire header in the FA Cup quarter-final, which, cruel, it was almost Gordon Banks-esque, wasn't it, in the way it was almost behind him and almost on his line, managed to pull it against the post. And best goal, I've gone for Jamal Lewis against Leicester. I think partly because of our view of it in the press box as well. Just as soon as he struck it, you could see the way the ball was bending from out to in, and that was a lovely goal and a winner as well, which we didn't get many of. Pad, what are your 2 nominations?
Yeah, best save United, but the league game down here, and the one from Anthony Martial where he's just contorted his body close range, and it's just how has he had the agility, because he couldn't have had huge amounts of time to adjust his body to make that save. And as you did that piece the other day, there was quite a few contenders, and goes back to what we said at the outset, why he's the head and shoulders the best player for Norwich this season. So that was my best save, best goal. Not in terms of absolute Kevin De Bruyne-esque world-class finishing, but because of what it meant. It's got to be Kenny McLean soaring like a salmon to head Emi Buendia to set them on their way against Man City, just because that was like David landing a punch on Goliath. That was, my God, they've scored. They've only had the impudence to score against this team. Could they actually do something in this game? And as we know, that was the start of, well, an absolutely epic signature performance in the Premier League. And so I would go for that one, because it was just a brilliantly executed goal. And we've spent so much time analysing what they don't do from set pieces, but that just sort of maybe showed that they were underutilising what they could have offered in an offensive set piece manner as well. With the likes of McLean, and when they had fit centre backs, that they really didn't do enough attacking set pieces as well. But on that occasion, they most certainly did. Brilliant goal.
That was a Buendia corner, wasn't it? And when you think back to when Duda came in January, he did pretty much take over set pieces, didn't he? And I think it was pretty categorically proven that Emi Buendia is better, and Kenny McLean as well, both better at delivering set pieces than Duda was. He already seems a bit like ancient history, doesn't he? And Connor, finally, your 2 nominations.
Yeah, I think my save is the same as Paddy's. Are you thinking the Martial one? Was it from a corner and it got sort of flipped back? Yeah,
Rashford flicked it on.
Yeah, that was a ridiculous save. But there's been as you know, as your piece detail, there's been so many this season where you've just sort of thought, how's he kept that out? And that's why he's player of the season. So yeah, I'll go for that Manchester United one if you're asking me to single one out. The goal, I would probably go for the Campbell's goal against Man City. I think in terms of how they try to play and how they bypass the press and work the ball up the pitch. I mean, it was essentially a pass from, I think it was a throw-in in the right-back position to Cantwell putting it in the net. It was such a well-worked goal. And in terms of aesthetic and in terms of their style, it was kind of, at that point, felt, okay, this style can work in the Premier League and it can work against the bigger sides and one of the best sides. And ultimately, obviously, we haven't seen that subsequently. But for me, that felt like it was just a really good goal, firstly. But again, it kind of felt like it justified them playing the way that they were trying to play. And, you know, as Pad said about Anfield and what that did, it kind of felt like they'd arrived onto the Premier League, I think, with that goal. Because I think as good as the header from the corner was from McLean, it was kind of a bit of sort of FA Cup-y, I guess, in terms of it's kind of a lower side landing a punch, isn't it? But can they sustain it? And actually, when they scored the second goal, it was doing it in their own way and in their own style, and by keeping the ball on the floor and moving it sort of with limited touches and getting themselves up the pitch. So for me, that was probably my highlight, yeah. But Lewis, I think in terms of sort of visual and the view we had, would probably take that one, because the way he sort of cut across the ball for that goal against Leicester was superb, actually. And yeah, as you said, Dave, we probably had the best view of it in the press box as well. Saw it from the moment it left his boot. It was only going one place when he angled it in the bottom corner. So yeah, I'll give an honourable mention to Jamal Lewis's strike, but yeah, for me it's that second goal against Manchester City.
And I liked that Max Aarons was claiming the assist for that goal as well afterwards, for the overhit cross that Jamal controlled on the far side of the box. But that Todd one, yeah, Stiepermann and Buendia against Man City, they'd started the move and they got Pukki away. And that was the Wolverine celebration, wasn't it? It felt like that was the moment that he arrived. I think that was the night that Chris Sutton christened him the Dirham Deco, and that sort of stuck for most of the season. So despite all of the dross that we have seen, and there have been some consistent low spells, there were some enjoyable parts along the way, and I think everyone's just ready for the next phase of this project, aren't they, under Stuart Webber and Daniel Farker, to see where things go. So I think we should turn our attentions to that. Since we've last recorded, I think that's four signings and probably a fifth due fairly swiftly as well. So Blaheta, Sorensen, Mumba and Soto all unveiled since the Burnley game, haven't they? And Pad, who's the one that sort of stands out for you, the one who is most likely to be having an impact? I mean, the business isn't done yet, obviously, so it's a theoretical question, but which one sort of do you like the look of most?
Well, I think the one who's probably at this stage closest to the first team 11 is probably Plaheta, and you know, obviously he's the one they've spent the most money on, so that's probably stating the obvious. But it does look like he's got something they don't really possess, even with Hernandez, in terms of. But the only caveat I have with that is that he looks like a player who might have been able to change the dynamic in the Premier League, because ultimately I think where his greatest asset would have seemed, looking at the show reel, is counter-attacking teams. And I think in the Championship, more often than not, you'd expect Norwich to dominate the ball. So I'm not quite sure how you fit him into that dynamic at the moment. But certainly there's no doubt that he does give them, as Daniel said, a different dimension. And maybe hints with Sonani coming in as well that, well, I mean, more than hints, because Daniel, when pressed on it on Friday before the trip to Man City, said they felt they lacked pace and they lacked physicality in central areas, hence why Sorensen's also come in the building. So if that is the case, that to me is quite positive, that it isn't going to be because that's the stick that occasionally is, more than occasionally, is beaten with, that he's set in his ways, and it's where's the plan B, where's the plan C, well, maybe we're starting to see evidence that in his mind at least, he now needs to translate that into putting a team out on the park in the Championship. But maybe there is going to be a bit more devil to sort of how Norwich set about the task, and they need to, because if they're too predictable and too heavily reliant on dominating possession and good technical midfield players and building the play, then time will have moved on. The Norwich who won the 18-19 Championship season are not going to win the 2021. They need to reinvent themselves a degree, and I think this signing particularly for me is a signal that's probably what they're looking to do. So, of course, as Daniel said, he's come from the Polish league, as Sorensen has come from the Danish league. It is a different challenge ahead, and how quickly those lads can adapt particularly will dictate how much of a leading role they've got. But certainly 22 years of age, he's got it all in front of him, and if Daniel can extract his raw assets, I think we could have a player on our hands there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Sam McCallum and Melvin City obviously coming in as well, haven't they? So that there's already quite a bit of movement. Stuart Webber's been busy already. It sounds like Matthew Dennis, who was with Arsenal, he's probably going to end up being confirmed fairly soon as well. Young midfielder. But Connor, Mumba and Soto, I mean, you've been generally sorting our sort of profile pieces on these guys. I mean, Mumba in particular is one that you did quite a bit of digging on, didn't you? Where do you sort of see them slotting in?
Mumba's a really interesting one because he has been developed at Sunderland as a central midfielder, and it's clear from the release that Norwich have put out and from Daniel Farke's quotes that they see him as a full-back option, specifically a right-back option. For me, it's probably less about him and more what it means for the right-back position going forward. They've obviously got Max Aarons and Sam Byram there already, and Mumba's only 18, so there's a case that possibly a season in the 23s, but then he sort of spent last year or the second half of last season out on loan at South Shields, who I think a Northern Premier League side, because essentially he was playing in Sunderland's under 23 side, who aren't particularly very good, so he basically forced the issue upon himself. So I don't really see him joining a side where he's perhaps going to be playing development football, and for all extents and purposes, it feels like he's going to be a first team addition. So the wider question for me is probably what does it mean about the right back position, and what does it mean more so about Max Aarons? And we've kind of seen the Bayern Munich rumours. I think if you were to push me and say which player do you think is probably best suited to the Premier League at the moment, I'd probably say Max Aarons in response to any of those young players. I think he's probably the most assured. But yeah, back to Mumba. I mean, 18 years of age. Was he 5'3"? So he's not particularly tall. He's a really young player. Captained Sunderland when he was 16. John O'Shea almost gave him the gesture, or gave him the armband as a gesture to sort of start the changing era, I guess, to start a new era at Sunderland. Stuart Donald obviously went in, and once they got relegated, I think they beat Wolves on the final day, as Wolves were going up and they were going down. And so he captained them. I think he started in their first game in League One as well against Charlton, but sort of fell out of favour. I think Lee Cattermole had quite a good season last year and just got kept out of the midfield slot, which was where they saw him. But I think most of all, there seemed to be some debate, and I've spoken to Phil Smith, who is a Sunderland reporter, and he essentially said to me they couldn't really work out his best position, and they kind of had too many central midfielders or experienced midfielders, Lee Cattermole, Max Power, to name a few, and then Luke O'Noyne, who they bought as a midfielder, played as a right back, so that kind of kept him out of the right back slot, and he kind of found himself in the background a little bit. But their supporters are furious, to be honest, that he's been able to sign for Norwich. They've kind of seen it with Joel Asoro, who signed for Swansea a couple of seasons ago, and most recently and probably more painfully for anyone that's watched the Netflix series is Josh Maja, who went to Bordeaux. And it kind of, I guess that they're in a bad state at the moment in terms of ownership and in terms of their demise a little bit. But their academy has sort of almost been a bright spot, and he was essentially meant to be the poster boy for this new era, and he's departed. He's departed for a fee that they consider fairly modest. So it's an interesting one. It's a very Norwich City signing, a player 18 years of age that they feel they can develop and improve on. Interesting that they've committed him to the right back position. I think straight off the bat, that's probably given him some assurance as well, considering he's perhaps had to learn two positions rather than one, and he's now coming into a club being told what position he plays and probably having a pathway spelled out to him as well. So he's interesting. And then, Sebastian Soto, American forward, probably not one we expect for the first team. He's already trialling with Telstar, Charlie Gilmore, who Norwich signed from Arsenal last summer, spent last season with. I think he had a very productive year with them, played a vast majority of their games, if not all of them, with a view to joining them on loan. So there's been some work permit issues. He was due to play for the US national team before lockdown, I believe, against the Netherlands and Wales. But because those games didn't happen, he's not eligible for a work permit. So Norwich have had to sort out a loan move. He's gone to Holland. He's previously played for Hanover, made his debut against Wolfsburg, scored a goal in the Bundesliga. So has tremendous pedigree, is only 20. Clearly, they feel there's a player there, and you have to be inclined to agree looking at the pedigree. But I just wonder how beneficial a loan spell to the Dutch second tier is at this stage in his career, when he's probably had a year being fairly prolific in Hanover's under-19s. So that's going to be one to watch with interest, I think, him and how he develops. But for me, probably more a player if Norwich fail to get promotion and they find themselves back in the Championship next year. But we shall see on both of those two. I think both fit the model, don't they, in terms of age and in terms of characters. They're two very Stuart Webber signings in sort of untapped potential, I guess. And it'll be interesting to see how they develop. But yeah, I would imagine Mumba will probably see more of than Soto for the season that's coming up.
And Jamal Lewis and Max Aarons were both wingers when they were first in. I remember watching an FA Youth Cup game at Manchester City when Jamal was the best player for Norwich. They missed Todd Cantwell that day, actually. Was that quarter final? I can't remember now, to be perfectly honest. But Jamal was, Max was, and of course Ben Godfrey, his position. So I suppose it's the right age to be changing someone's position, isn't it? So the thing that stood out for me as well was that the Under-20 World Cup last summer, only Erling Haaland scored more goals than him, who of course is now worth 150 million or something for Dortmund. He's been tearing it up in the Champions League, isn't he? He's basically a superstar already. He's got an incredible record. He scored 9 goals in one game in that tournament, and that's how he got the Golden Boot. But Soto scored 4 goals along with 3 other players. So that's all going to be interesting. But I suppose a big part of all this as well, Pad, is who goes out. And just while you were giving your answer a minute ago, talking about Norwich being, dominant again, and they'll be looking to be the protagonists, I suppose, as Daniel would put it, and they want to be dominating the ball. Mo Leitner, of course, is sort of been in the background of all this, and it doesn't seem possible that he could come back into it. But I mean, if you want someone who's going to dominate the ball in the Championship, you've got a proven Championship title winner there, but it doesn't seem likely that they're going to be able to kiss and make up to that sort of extent, does it?
No, and you probably would for slightly different reasons, but Tom Tribal would be in the same category, a guy who has those type of attributes, not quite like for like with Leitner, but not dissimilar, hugely, same area of the pitch, likes to manipulate the ball, and he wasn't really a staple over the entire piece in the Premier League, and I just think Sorensen coming in now is maybe a signal that they want to shake up that area of the pitch. Melbourne City, of course, as well, but again, with the same caveat, he's a very young man. How close he will be to the first at the start of the season is probably to be decided. But I think there's a sense that, and you wrap around the Stuart Webber comments, that there are players there who they feel, as in Webber and Farke, that the journey's at an end and thanks for everything you've done, but we're going to move you on. And I think even he added that they would look to do that quite swiftly. So if that is the case, and that's Stuart Webber mapping it out, then what players is he referring to? Well, for me, they would be 2 at the top of the list, I think. I think Stiepermann has been used enough post Southampton to suggest that he still is in Farke's plans. Vrancic as well. We know what he can offer in the Championship if you keep him fit. But I would, if I was Leitner and Tribal, I'd be fearing that they probably aren't going to be on the next leg of the journey.
Yeah, which would kind of be a shame. Somebody that we haven't really spoken about much as well. I'm just thinking while you're saying that, Louis Thompson is technically coming back in, and I think he's still got 3 years on his contract off the top of my head as well, because he signed a new one mid-season last season, even though he had his injury problems. He is a player that they like, isn't he? And we've all talked about him being the potential Tete successor. Could you see a way back for him?
It's hard now. It's hard just because Farke loves him. He really does like the fella on a personal level, and there's somebody around the group. But the body of injuries he's had now, I think, with the greatest respect, probably lower leagues in the Football League you're looking at now. I don't think you could expect him to come in now and be spearheading a team going for the promotion to the Premier League. So I think that ship's probably sailed. That I always thought it was quite a strange contractual move anyway to give him a new extended deal when they did. But as I say, if that emanates from he's one of the good guys around the group, then maybe there was an element of that. But in terms of his footballing ability now, I think that ship has sailed. And again, you don't go out and bring Sorensen in if you think Louis Thompson's the answer, do you? So, and obviously Morris, he only had another year left. So him going to MK Dons to me is effectively goodbye Carlton Morris. He clearly isn't in the plans. And this time next summer, he will no longer be a Norwich player. So I would be surprised if Louis Thompson doesn't end up back at MK. I think with Russell Martin there, it's an obvious one. He was there back end of last season. So, yeah, I don't for 1 minute think Louis Thompson features in their championship plans.
Maybe he just fancies coming back for pre-season and trying to force his way in. But I think the problem, a big problem, has been in the background is that Norwich have got quite a few players with injury problems on their record, haven't they? You know, Leitner and Tribal are two of those. You now have got to say that Hanley, Close, and Zimmerman all are as well. And just finally then, chaps, I suppose the big lessons that we take from this season into next season, quite a broad question. But for me, it has got to be the defence. If there is one place that they're going to spend a bit of money, you know, a decent fee, I would be most happy to see it be at centre-back. We saw Akinfenwa come off the bench on Sunday, so you know it looks like he might be in and around it. But at this stage, it seems unlikely that he's going to play a major part. But then, you know, Godfrey emerged during the title-winning season, and you don't know. But I think another body is needed in there, whether you're going to play 4 or 3 at the back. If you're going to play 3 at the back, then you need another one at least in the squad. Because for me, Hanley, Closer, Godfrey, and Zimmerman are all clearly good enough for the Championship. But the problem, well, Godfrey, we'll have to see whether he stays or whether anyone comes in with a big bid. Clearly an ambitious young man. He captained the England under-21s this season. The other 3, as long as they're fit, that's fine. But I feel like their fitness issues mean that, for me, a big focus has got to be on trying to build a more solid defensive foundation. If you're going to come back, if they're going to pull off what seems unlikely as we sit here at the moment and bounce back to the Premier League, it can't be conceding whatever it was, over 50, was it 57 goals on the way to the title. As exciting as it was and as swashbuckling and as a brilliant season as it was, it's turned out that then trying to establish yourself in the Premier League without a solid defensive base is incredibly difficult. So for me, that's going to be sort of where my attention will remain a lot, even in the first half of next season, before we even start thinking about promotion or playoffs or, you know, best case scenario. It's whether they can be more solid and whether they can repel the opposition a bit more, because I just don't think we've seen enough of that under Daniel Farke. Connor, what's your big takeaway from this season?
Probably the importance of the midfield. I think that probably sums it up. I think there's only been a few occasions this year where I've looked at Norwich City midfield and thought, yeah, they looked pretty balanced, and even when they reverted to Tetty and McLean and looked a bit more solid, I think they probably lacked a number 10 with sufficient quality. I think they've probably realised inside the club that actually you don't win any prizes for being loyal, and you can be as loyal as you want, but if the quality isn't there, then ultimately you're not going to progress the club. So I think those are probably my 2 takeaways. It's not really surprised me. I mean, we've spoken about Tribal and Leitner there. It doesn't really surprise me that that's an area of concern, and we can talk about the defence. And I mean, we individually, you listed it there. I think they've got fairly competent players at Championship level. I think for me the issue is probably how you protect them and improve the defensive structure as a whole. And I think a lot of that for me stems from midfield and getting better, more physical options in there, because frankly, to be relying on Alex Tetty at the stage, as good of a player as he is, but at the stage of his career he is, and for as long as they have, is not particularly great. And when they talk about sort of mid to long term plans and aspirations, regardless of how important Alex Tetty is now, that he's not going to figure long term because of his age and his fitness. And I think he's even indicated, as he tends to once he signs a new contract, that this will be his last. And I kind of get a sense that he means it this time. So they for me, the lesson needs to be the midfield setup, how they improve that, and equally how they get to a point where you don't almost sort of fear for them a little bit when Alex Tettey isn't in the starting lineup. So that for me has to be the lessons they learn. I think defensive solidity definitely, and also loyalty as well. Just because a player's done wonderful things for you in the past doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to do that again. So I think we associate Stuart Webber with ruthlessness, and again I think he's probably learned these lessons himself. But I think they probably need to be a bit more ruthless with their squad if next season if a player isn't performing, perhaps rather than persisting and trying to almost put themselves above the parapet and thinking that they're an exception because they've shown a bit more loyalty, because ultimately it doesn't get you anywhere in football. So I think that those for me are the lessons that need to be learned, and I think it's just to look ahead to next season. That opening period is going to be crucial because they are going to have expectation and they are going to have a bit of pressure on their shoulders. So if they don't come out of the blocks, then okay, supporters may or may not be there, but those questions are going to remain. So they've got to learn those lessons, and they've got to learn them swiftly.
And that opening period is probably going to be behind closed doors. And the final word, Mr. Davitt, your big takeaway from the season?
Well, on a broader point, you boys obviously drilled down into specific aspects of whether it's defensively or midfield or loyalty, but I think recruitment was horrendous this season. Everybody agrees, even Stuart Webber would tell you, and has done. They got that badly wrong. So this window we're going into now officially opened on Monday. And it's not just recruitment in. They've obviously made a lot of inroads in that area, but out as well, because there's no point in saying that we don't need to sell, and then we get towards the end of this window and then some of the crown jewels depart and they don't have plans in place to replace those characters. So recruitment, that will hold the key. And then the second thing is Daniel Farke, his ability to, and he's talked about it already, the mindset to switch the mentality from getting used to and almost expecting to lose games on a weekly basis to what they had when they won the title, which was, they went out there and they were never beaten and they went right to the end and they ground teams down, and it was a collective and an individual mindset, and that sprung from the head coach. And momentum and confidence, everything that we've talked about earlier on today about what Teemu Pukki is lacking across the whole squad. Daniel needs to somehow, and I don't know how he quite goes about that over this abbreviated pre-season, but he needs to almost turn the page and mentally get into the minds and get into the heads of these players who are still going to be here, that they are, as Connor rightly says, expected to be challenged at the right end. Can they flick that switch? Because the success or failure of how quickly they're able to do that probably hinges on Daniel's future and also where Norwich go next season, I think.
There we go. Right. Thanks, chaps. I feel like we've drilled down into it quite a bit there. Thank you very much for listening. Of course, it's been a weird and long season, but we've put out a lot of pods and videos across what has basically been a year. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, then please do. And likewise, the Pinken YouTube channel, there's always loads of videos going on there. Pinken.com is of course, the place to go for all the latest Norwich City news and analysis, such as the sex things, which was on Pinken.com this morning, thanks to an unfortunate headline error, which was swiftly corrected, which was, of course, supposed to be six things, which I'm sure you're used to that format from, we've been doing that for a few years. But, sex sells, so it's performed well online, so we're happy. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. The pod, we will probably continue between here and the start of next season. There will be pods, although the timing of it might vary a little bit. We'll probably judge it on what's going on really between now and the start of the season. But we'll keep the podcast coming your way. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the break, and let's start looking to the future.